Podcast number 20. Woohoo! That's a milestone of some sort, I'm sure. Nice, even number. Shit. Maybe I should take the children's book series approach here. Any episode of the podcast, after all, could be someone's first episode, so they may need an introduction. My name is Sage Man, my channel is called TAPAS and Stuff Productions, and this weekly podcast is about future creative ideas I hope to pursue. That being said, you probably ought to listen to every previous podcast in order to know what the heck I'm talking about. Really, I'm just padding the runtime because I don't like the first segment to start too early, and I think it's fair for it to start now. Companions of the Dance Hall, Act 2, Scene 6. Fun fact, Scenes 5 and 6 of Act 2 are the only time in the play that there are two consecutive scenes that don't have songs in them. They're also the only two scenes in Act 2 not to have songs. I think that's not a bad structure. I kind of like it. It's a nice middle to the act. In Scene 6, Irenicus lounges in a comfy chair, and Virna comes to confront him about how no one informed her of Dritz's capture. He tells her, in so many words, that now that he's been revealed as the real antagonist, she serves no narrative function, and he has no reason to keep her alive. She doesn't take the hint and continues to argue with him, so he casts Avada Kedavra on her. I deleted a ton of Irenicus equals Voldemort jokes from the script to make sure that this one Voldemort joke had its maximum impact. Deneen takes the bullet for her, dying. Stunned that her brother would sacrifice himself for her, Virna flees. Bodhi comes in and steps over Deneen's body to inform Irenicus, in so many words, that the main characters have escaped their cell. Bodhi assures Irenicus not to worry, that she'll round them up in time for the profane ritual to take place. Team Salmon. Salmon! Not much to report in the overall scheme of things. I'm slowly organizing everything I've come up with regarding Some Sweet Kind of Vampire over the past 8 years into a genuine plan. We're slowly reaching the end of Whirlwind Volume 1. Haven't had much time for D&D now that I'm working full-time. Fortunately, I'm not working every single day. I'm scheduled for every day, but sometimes the weather is bad and my aunt tells me there probably won't be many customers, so there's no need to come in. I'm nearly at the end of the third volume of my epic-length My Little Pony fanfiction, just 2 chapters left to go, and once that's over, I'm going to take a break from writing fanfiction for a good long while. Not abandoning it entirely. I have stories to finish, and I'm going to finish them, but I've grown beyond allowing fanfiction to be my top priority. Gotta focus on other things. Today, in The Secrets of Droon, we're reading a book which, off the top of my head, looking at the title, the cover illustration, and the summary on the back, I don't really remember what it's about. This must be one that I didn't have as a kid, and only read back when I was collecting the books. That being Book 18, Search for the Dragon Ship, illustrated by Tim Jessel. So yeah, no recollection of what I'm getting into. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, A Kick from Beyond. We open at school where Julie is flying around over the sports field. Eric wants her to take it easy so she doesn't get caught, but Neil thinks it's a good idea that Julie is practicing with her powers. We get the first appearance of Mr. Frando, the gym teacher, who's a semi-recurring character here in the upper world. One of the soccer balls starts flying around, and the kids realize it's their soccer ball. The whole surface turns black, and the word Galen appears across its surface. They skip out on gym class and go to Droon, where they arrive in Lumpland, and immediately come upon Salamandra besieging Galen's tower. Chapter 2, The Not Nice Princess. Khan emerges with a wooden sword to attempt to help Galen, but Salamandra batters him away with her fiery and thorny magic. The 3 kids take shelter with Khan in his house, where we see Khan's family for the first time, and where Kia takes shelter as well. Julie gets everyone into the tower by flying, so they can join Galen and Max in defending the tower, but Salamandra finds her way in, and all of her stolen magic proves very powerful, absorbing the blue lightning from the good wizards, freezing everyone in place, and reading everyone's minds to find what she's after. She takes a piece of parchment from the tower, blueprints of a dragon-shaped ship built by Emperor Ko. The kids have to flee the tower as it becomes overgrown with thorns, leaving Galen and Max trapped inside. They tell the kids to seek out Thog at Zorfendorf Castle. Khan joins them and they set off. Chapter 3, The Hands of Thog. They arrive at Zorfendorf and are told that the prince isn't at home. Again, revelations in Book 25 make me uncertain whether or not Prince Zorfendorf even exists, and explain that they need to see Thog, who the guards say hasn't left the library in 400 years. They go to the library and meet Thog, a giant who explains that long ago Galen lent him a book, and he lends the same book to Julie. He further explains that back then Galen found that he couldn't destroy the dragon ship, so he broke it into several pieces and Thog helped him hide it. Salamandra arrives and once again freezes everyone, hypnotizing Thog into helping her find the ship and summoning forth creatures from ancient Droon called Ghost Riders to chase down Khan and the kids. Chapter 4, Eyes in the Darkness. The group hide from the Ghost Riders in a nearby forest. Kia explains that the Ghost Riders aren't dangerous unless you look at them, so despite the noise of the Ghost Riders looking for them, they have to resist the urge to look. There's a weird scene where Nelag shows up. Kia tries to prevent him looking at the Ghost Riders. There's a bunch of chaos, and Kia sends Khan and the trio off to continue the quest to the dragon ship while she deals with the Riders. Okay. They flee along the river, but Julie and Khan end up falling in, so Eric and Neil jump in after them. Chapter 5, Surprised by Candlelight. They go over a waterfall and hide behind it as the Ghost Riders continue to pursue. Behind the waterfall, they find a cave, occupied by none other than Hob, the mask-making imp. Hob reveals that he is able to see the Ghost Riders without being seen by them, thanks to one of his magical masks, which also protect him from Salamandra's mental powers. Hob makes masks for the whole crew, Eric's mask being finished first, allowing Eric to see the Ghost Riders, skeletons riding spiky gray horses, who have captured Kia. Kia telepathically tells Eric to follow Salamandra to the island of Morka. Eric goes back to the others, and before Hob is quite finished making Neil's mask, he uses a teleportation spell he once heard Kia use to bring them straight to Morka. Chapter 6, Island of Secrets. They have a bit of a crash landing due to Eric's inexperience with the spell, but arrive safely on Morka, recalling that it's the home of Grindel and the Hog Elves. They come upon Grindel, in his monster costume, who tells them that Salamandra has enslaved all of his people. Apparently, Grindel's monster costume protects him from Salamandra's control, just like Hob's masks do. Thog and the elves are digging in the mountain, where they recover the wings of the dragon ship. The kids attack Salamandra, but she transports herself and Thog away and engulfs Morka in a flood. Chapter 7, The Puzzle of the Past. Eric stops the flood by blocking it with boulders. In thanks, Grindel lends them the Soar Wings so they can pursue Salamandra. They fly to Jaffa City, where Salamandra and Thog are tearing the place up, having put the king and queen under her spell. They've already found the ship's wheel and its dragon-shaped figurehead, and Thog digs beneath the stables to find the ship's hull, then takes down the giant flag of Droon, which is actually the dragon ship's sail. They then depart to Plud. King Zello and Queen Relna explain that there are still Nins living in Plud who can put the ship together for her, and that in order to power the dragon ship, Salamandra will have to drain the powers of a wizard like Kia. Chapter 8, Zello's Believe It or Not. While Queen Relna goes to free Galen and Max, King Zello leads the party to Plud in a jet-powered hot air balloon invented by Friddle. That kinda kicks ass. Zello tells the legend of the dragon ship, that it is not the ship itself that has power, but rather where the ship goes, to the Isle of Mists, Emperor Ko's birthplace. Ko originally built the dragon ship so he could return home to die. Zello doesn't know what Salamandra hopes to find on the island. When they arrive in Plud, the hypnotized Nins are hard at work rebuilding the ship. The trio, Khan and Hob, go to stop the Nins, while Zello goes to save Kia. That's kind of interesting. It'd usually be the other way around. They find that the dragon ship is completed, and Salamandra is conjuring a storm to activate it. Hob flees in terror, and Julie pursues him, leaving Eric, Neil, and Khan to proceed. They find Zello has freed Kia, and the pair of them are battling the Ghost Riders. The fight goes well for our heroes, since the Ghost Riders can't see them, until Salamandra shows up, duels and defeats Kia, and ties her to the mast of the dragon ship as the storm gathers. Chapter 9, A Very Important Person. As the heroes charge in to free Kia, Hob appears with an offer for Salamandra, for her to power the ship with Galen instead of Kia. Salamandra is pleased, and makes the switch. The dragon ship, with Galen tied to the mast, begins to fly toward the Isle of Mists. Chapter 10, Follow That Ship. Kia gets all up in Hob's face, wondering what to do with him for his betrayal. It turns out, when Hob brought out Galen and Max was actually a shape-shifted Julie. She'd flipped through the book Thog gave her and found a page on the powers of the Hawkoth Maul, which include shape-shifting. And Galen was actually Nelag, and since Nelag has no actual power, the dragon ship starts to crash. They hop into Zello's balloon and pursue the falling ship. They board the ship and free Nelag, and Hob manages to steal Salamandra's magic staff. Thog, freed from Salamandra's enchantment, catches up to the ship and saves the flag of Droon. And when the dragon ship crashes with Salamandra on it, it doesn't explode, but instead completely disappears. Galen and Max are freed, and Galen asks Nelag how he managed to impersonate him. Nelag claims he did it by speaking nonsense, and it just came out right. Nelag also reveals that it was him who sent the kids the message that brought them to Droon today. After all, the ball said Galen, and the messages from Droon are always written backwards. Hob, meanwhile, is nowhere to be found, having disappeared with Salamandra's staff. And so, with some loose ends tied up and some new plot threads opened, the rainbow stairs appear, and the trio return home. So, yeah, I can see why I forgot this book. It had its moments. The Ghost Riders are cool, the debut of Thog, the returns of Hob and Grindel. All things that are good in principle, but the book feels really rushed. I'm remembering why I wanted to extend every book in the adaptation, a la The Hobbit. I'm assuming we can't afford that. And you know, when the first book, after Julie acquired her powers, should have really made a bigger deal out of them. Made it a story that actually centers around Julie and her powers in some way, but they barely factored into it. Adaptation-wise, we have 3 new guest stars in this book. First is Mr. Frando. I'd be inclined to cast Jeff Garlin. I don't know, it's a pretty minor role, but I like the irony of a gym teacher who's out of shape, and Garlin is charming. Here, we also meet Khan's wife and 2 children. The children get dialogue in a later book, but are silent in this one. So in this episode, we need only cast Mrs. Khan. Let's go with April Winchell. And finally, Thog, who is described as a 20-foot giant with a bald head, 3 floppy ears, wearing a fur wrap and a rope belt. Given his nature as a calm, gentle giant, I gravitated toward Jason Segel, who, in my imagination, would have been the first person in the series to receive special guest star credit. I'm a huge fan of Jason Segel's work, even if he does seem rather dispassionate about everything he does that's not a personal pet project. And today, in Keys and Kingdoms, we're watching The Sword in the Stone. I love this film. It's not universally beloved. There's definitely a good reason there's dispute about whether it's a Silver Age or Bronze Age film, but I love it. Not much of a plot, just quirky characters, educational value, a depiction of Merlin, who remains very popular in Disney crossovers, and the motherfucking Sherman Brothers making their Disney film debut. The Sherman Brothers, for those who don't know, were songwriters who gave us all the most hummable songs in the Disney canon. With their clever rhymes and funny made-up words, it's impossible not to love them. The Sword in the Stone was based on the book The Once and Future King by T.H. White. White's interpretation of the Arthurian legends, particularly the young king's relationship with Merlin. I believe that White may have originated the idea that Merlin experiences time backwards, or at the very least originated one particular interpretation of that idea, that by the time Merlin meets Arthur, he's constantly spouting anachronisms and pop culture references. And I could be very, very wrong. So like most Disney films, this one opens with a book. The title song happens via the book rather than during the opening credits. Our passionate singer explains that the king has died, no one could decide his successor, and that the sword in the stone magically appeared in London, that only the true king can withdraw. It doesn't really become relevant until the end of the film because, well, Arthur withdrawing the sword from the stone is kind of just one moment, not much of a film. We come upon Merlin, played by Carl Swenson, complaining about having to live in medieval times and awaiting the arrival of someone, he's not sure who. We also meet his talking owl familiar Archimedes, played by Junius Matthews. Archimedes is introduced in a rather clever way. He emerges from his birdhouse shortly after Merlin says he's waiting for someone, and says, "Who? Who? I'd like to know who." If that's not the perfect way to reveal that your owl can talk, I don't know what is. Familiars, that is to say the small animals who often accompany wizards on their journeys, are a feature in D&D that always seems to have a lot of restrictions. Familiars really should be what Archimedes here is, a character in their own right who can interact with everyone, not just their master. The restrictions, I guess, prevent the wizard from being overpowered, but still. We meet the 12-year-old Arthur, who at this point in his life mostly goes by the name of Wart. He's the page to the young knight Sir Kay. Arthur is voiced by Ricky Sorensen and 2 of the sons of director Wolfgang Reitherman, Richard and Robert, which, weirdly enough, are also the first names of the Sherman brothers. That's a weird coincidence. And yes, you heard right, Arthur has 3 different voice actors. It's a common misconception that one of the 3 actors plays him in the first act, one in the second, and another in the third act to represent his aging. I would imagine the people who say that have never actually seen the film. Wart does not age physically or vocally at any point during the film. Rather, the 3 boys playing him switch places constantly throughout the film. I suspect that Sorensen, the eldest of the three actors, at 17 years of age when the film was released, played him for most of the film, but every so often one of the Reitherman brothers will fill in for him and sound noticeably, jarringly younger while doing so. Anyway, we come upon Wart and Kay during a hunting trip, the deer they're hunting being made of reused animation from Bambi. There's a lot of reused animation in this film and The Jungle Book, in addition to other sloppy details like Arthur's inconsistent voice acting. I can see reasons other than xerography why the last three animated entries of the Silver Age are arguably the first three of the Bronze Age. It does make sense. I'm not saying it's a stupid system. So Arthur meets Merlin and Archimedes, and they just have tea together and get to know each other. It's a bit sudden, but it's charming. Merlin shows Arthur his working models of things that haven't been invented yet and his magical household utensils, and asks Arthur about his education. Arthur explains that he's learning various forms of combat in preparation for becoming a squire, and Merlin decides to give him a proper education. And then we get what's probably my favorite scene in the film, actually. Merlin shrinking down every object in his house to pack it into his bag while singing. Incredibly catchy song and dazzling animation to go with it. I wonder if perhaps an interpretation of Merlin could serve as a character in Keys and Kingdoms. A time-traveling, epic-level wizard as a recurring figure. Perhaps I could meld that with the idea that Stan Lee makes a cameo in every adventure. Kay returns home without Wart to his father, Sir Ector, played by Sebastian Cabot. Wart returns home and is sentenced to an extra 4 hours of kitchen duty. Merlin meets Ector and discusses his intentions to educate Wart. He and Ector butt heads over their differing ideas of how to raise the boy, but Ector is ultimately intimidated into allowing Marvin, as he insists on calling him, to stay. A Sir Pellinor arrives with news from London, and Merlin sends Archimedes down to find out what the news is. In a rather interesting turn, Merlin gets Archimedes to do so by threatening to turn him into a human. This movie is just really clever. The news that the winner of this year's New Year's Day tournament gets to be king of all England, so Ector sets to work getting Kay all trained up. From this point on, the bulk of the film doesn't have much plot. Just 3 sequences where Merlin turns Wharton himself into animals to teach some sort of abstract lesson with very little actual educational value. First, they become tiny fish and swim in the castle moat to learn about the balance of nature, thinking in 3 dimensions, and taking the initiative. They encounter a massive pike and have to fight it. See, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. In a normal D&D game, a pike probably wouldn't be any more powerful than the tiny fish that Merlin and Arthur turn into, right? They'd both be tiny creatures without much more than 1 hit point, but the pike needs to pose more of a danger to the tiny fish than vice versa, you follow me? Anyway, Merlin uses the opportunity to teach Arthur about brains over brawn, but fails to come through and save the boy when the lesson is over, forcing Archimedes to save Wart's life, though the owl denies it, insisting he intended to eat him. Later, Merlin bails Arthur out of his kitchen duties by having the kitchen clean itself so they can go be squirrels. Merlin teaches about foresight, gravity, and ultimately love, as 2 female squirrels find themselves infatuated with the squirrel versions of our student-teacher duo. When the 2 of them become human again, the horror of Merlin's admirer is played firmly for laughs, but the heartbreak of Wart's squirrel girl is considered by some to be one of the biggest tearjerkers in Disney history. It's definitely up there. When they get back, Ector is angry that they used magic to do Wart's chores, considering it to be black magic. Merlin asks, "You consider washing dishes and sweeping floors an act of evil?" A pretty good summary of the medieval mindset that all magic is evil. It's just like anything else, no tool is inherently good or evil, it's what you do with it. Wart's insubordination gets him kicked off the trip to London. Merlin tries to cheer him up with some further education, but Archimedes points out that Merlin's anachronistic teachings on geography and astronomy will make Arthur look like a lunatic in the time period in which he lives. And so Archimedes tries to teach Arthur, starting with literacy, but he doesn't have the patience to be a teacher. The conversation turns to flight, so Merlin turns Arthur into a little bird and has Archimedes teach him to fly. They get attacked by a hawk. Again, there's got to be a more elaborate way to tier these creatures, In D&D, a hawk, an owl, and a little sparrow would all have roughly the same stats. Anyway, the attack leads Wart to end up in the home of Madame Mim, a witch and Merlin's nemesis. Mim showboats a bit via musical number, then decides that if Arthur is important to Merlin, she'd better kill him. So she attempts it by turning into a cat, another thing in a D&D game which wouldn't actually be more powerful than a sparrow. Merlin arrives in time to save him, so Mim challenges Merlin to a wizard's duel, which in this universe is defined very specifically as involving shape-shifting, rather than the sort of wizard's duels we might be familiar with. The two of them transform into various forms in an attempt to destroy one another. Mim sets 3 rules. No vegetable or mineral, only animal. You'd think a witch who considers herself on even footing with Merlin wouldn't use such an outdated method of classifying things. No make-believe things, she specifically cites pink dragons, and no invisibility. She breaks rule number 3 before they've walked 4 paces, but Merlin, being the good guy, plays fair throughout the whole duel. I feel like giving you a blow-by-blow of the whole duel because it's really creative and clever and should very well inspire the use of shape-shifting in the RPG. First, Mim returns to visibility in the form of a crocodile and ambushes Merlin. He turns into a turtle and hides within his own hat, biting her when she sniffs around in the hat form. This offers him only a temporary advantage. The crocodile chases down the turtle, and Merlin turns into a rabbit to flee, so Mim becomes a fox to chase the rabbit down. Merlin hides inside a log and becomes a caterpillar to escape the log through a small hole. When Mim spots him, she becomes a chicken and starts pecking at him. He becomes a walrus and crushes the chicken, which becomes an elephant to strangle the walrus with its trunk, so Merlin becomes a mouse, terrifying the elephant, wherever the hell that piece of common knowledge came from. Why do people say elephants are afraid of mice? Because it's ironic, I guess. Anyway, once Elephant Mim recovers her nerve, she becomes a tiger. Mouse Merlin hides in a little hole, so Mim becomes a snake to pursue him. Merlin regains the upper hand by becoming a crab to attack the snake, so Mim becomes a rhinoceros to smash him. Crab Merlin dodges, and Rhino Mim crashes straight into a tree, so Merlin becomes a goat to ram into her and send her off a cliff. Mim returns in the form of a purple dragon. She claims this doesn't break rule number 2, whose exact wording was, no make-believe things like pink dragons and stuff. So apparently in this universe, pink dragons don't exist, but purple ones do. Which I'm pretty sure is true of D&D as well, purple dragons being one of a few chromatic dragons outside of the main 5. I think they breathe like psychic energy or something, so fair enough. Maybe it's dark energy, I don't know, I forget. Anyway, Merlin attempts to run and hide from the dragon Mim by turning into a mouse again, but she catches him and he deals the final blow of the duel. He becomes a virus, leaving Mim sick and bedridden. Merlin and the 2 birds leave Mim to her fate, and Arthur comes to really appreciate the brains over brawn and knowledge is power approach Merlin has been teaching him. So this duel gave me a thought regarding both what I said about the creature size back in Sleeping Beauty and in tiering various sized animals during this film. Well, it occurs to me that in 3rd edition and Pathfinder, size is a huge factor in your stealth, accuracy, and armor rating, being better the smaller you are and worse the bigger you are, because if you're big, you're easier to hit and it's harder to hide. Perhaps by combining that with 5th edition's use of size being a factor in one's hit dice, I think that's a nice combination. So if tiny creatures have D4 hit dice, perhaps diminutive and fine creatures have dice expressions of D3 and D2. That leaves the question of what hit dice colossal creatures have, because gargantuan creatures have D20, and that's the biggest one. Maybe I'll ignore the whole thing about tiering animals and just stick with the tiny to gargantuan scale. Yeah, I don't know. I still think tiny's not small enough, and gargantuan's not big enough. Then it's winter, and the plot, such as it is, gets wrapped up in a hasty fashion. Kay's new squire has come down with the mumps, so Ector reinstates Wart as the squire. Wart eagerly goes to tell Archimedes and Merlin. Archimedes is congratulatory, but Merlin is disappointed that this excites Wart, thinking the boy's priorities had shifted thanks to his education. Merlin and Wart get in a brief shouting match, Arthur believing Merlin's knowledge won't amount to anything for an orphaned peasant, and so being a squire is the best thing that could happen to him, before Merlin blasts himself off to 20th century Bermuda to cool off. When they get to London, Wart realizes he forgot to pack Kay's sword and goes to find one for him. There's no one in town due to the tournament, so Arthur finds the sword and the stone, forgotten in a churchyard, and effortlessly removes it, bringing it back to Kay. This causes an uproar, as all the knights at the tournament, led by a fellow named Black Bart, played by Thurl Ravenscroft, which is usual booming bass, bring him back to the stone so they can put it back and witness him doing it. After several men prove that they can't pull the sword from the stone, even after it's already been pulled, Arthur does so, and is proclaimed King of England. Arthur is overwhelmed by the very notion of having to face kingly duties, But fortunately, Merlin returns from his tropical vacation having calmed down, but not before the single most horrendous example of Arthur's inconsistent voice acting occurs, with Arthur saying, "I wish Merlin was here," and then calling Merlin's name an instant later in a completely different voice. Merlin readies himself to advise the boy on being king, eager to see the story of King Arthur grow into legends, books, and motion pictures. Charming film. I never noticed before how rushed the ending is, but I really love this film, and Merlin's use of magic, shape-shifting, education, and time travel is definitely a great addition to add inspiration to the Keys and Kingdoms mythos, as is, Arthurian legend in general. So that was podcast number 20. I hope it has historical value someday. Thanks for spending this time with me.